So, good morning, Reverend Blay.
Good morning.
Crossacres Year 1. It's really lovely that you can join us for our question and answer session.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
Oh, that is lovely to hear. So, in Year 1, we've been doing so much learning this half term about Christianity at churches. And we have looked around churches online, of course. And we've learned all sorts of different objects and what their names are and where they're placed in churches. We've also looked at why we call things sacred. Now, that brought up quite a lot of questions for people. And if you don't mind, as we're coming to the end of our block of Christianity learning, would you mind answering some questions from the children, please?
I will do my very best.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So our first question is from Roon, who is in Miss O'Gara's class. Yes, so his question is, why do Christians get baptised?
It's a very good question. Christians get baptized for two reasons, really. The primary reason, the main reason, is to share in Jesus's life. Christians believe that the most important thing that Christians believe is about Jesus, who died for us and came back to life and was raised to life. That's what we celebrate at Easter, that Jesus was killed on Good Friday, and I think there's a question about that later on, and came back to life again at Easter. And that idea of dying and coming back to life again is what baptism's about. These days, when people are baptized, certainly in this country, they tend to be baptized by just having water poured on their head. But originally, 2,000 years ago, when people were baptized, they were baptized in rivers, in flowing water. And that flowing water kind of represented being washed, or sins being washed away, or wrongdoing being washed away. But more than that, people were actually placed in the water, fully immersed in it. And that kind of represented the idea of Jesus being in the tomb, that as Jesus was died and went in the tomb and then came back out again into new life, so Christians kind of symbolically, not in real life, but kind of shared in that. And when they were baptized, they were placed in the water, and it was like they died. It was like being in the grave, and then were lifted back out again and came back into new life, sharing with Jesus in both his death and his new life as well.
Right, well, thank you for that. That's a brilliant answer. And you know, it was interesting that you were talking about Easter as well. That's the next thing we're going to be coming on to. So that'll tie in with some of the things we might discuss in the next few.
Excellent, very good.
Okay, so, Jessica from Miss O'Gara's class, she really wants to know, tying in with what we've just been talking about, why do you put the holy water on a baby's head? Now, we saw somebody in one of our videos, they used like a big shell to pour water on the baby's head when they're being baptized.
Right, yeah, that's what I use here, yeah.
And that's what you use there. Wow, that's fantastic. So Jessica was really wondering about that.
The reason for that links to what I've just said, is that when people originally baptized, they're baptized in rivers. That as the church grew and spread into all kinds of different areas, there weren't always handy rivers into which people could be baptized. And so it changed and developed in time. And in this country, when children, babies and adults are baptized, we tend to use what's called a font. You'll have seen that, I'm sure, when you've looked at different churches and the different objects. We use a font, and the water is poured on the person's head. And it still reflects that same idea of moving water, of being washed. We kind of lose that death element of it, which perhaps isn't a bad thing for some people. But we lose that, but we keep that sense of living water, of water that is moving and changing and washing and cleansing us. But I say, in this country we tend to do that. Other countries do different things. In some churches, they have massive, great fonts that people can stand in and actually fully immerse themselves in the font, like a great big barrel. In the Russian church, they have very, very wide fonts and quite deep. And the babies, particularly when they're baptized, are actually fully immersed. The priest will take them and sweep them through the water like that, so they get completely covered.
Gosh.
So different churches and different places have different traditions, but it's all keeping to that same idea of being washed and of sharing Jesus's death and his new life.
Right, so it's kind of that cleansing with the water, isn't
Yeah.
it? And the water is holy water. Now, how do you make water into holy water?
This is a very complicated question to do with the word holy. And it's very hard word to describe holy and to make sense of what it means. But what it literally means is something that's been set aside for a special purpose. And I don't know if you might have like a special toy or a special souvenir or a special ornament or something, or your mums and dads might. And you have something that's special. And because it's special, you don't want to play with it all the time because you don't want it to get broken or damaged. And your parents might have something that they want to keep safe. And so they put it up on a high shelf, keep it away. And that's what holy means. It means something that is set aside for something special. So when we talk about holy water, we're talking about water that has been set aside, that is used for this very special reason, for this very special purpose.
Right.
And to do that, we have it in a special place, like in a font, and we ask God's blessing upon it to make it suitable for our use and suitable for our purpose.
Right, fantastic. Thank you for that. So we're going to Miss Stanley's and Mrs. Sanders' class. So this is Erin. Ooh, now this is quite a deep question. Are you ready for this one, Reverend Blay?
Yeah.
How did you become a reverend?
That is a very good question, and could be quite a long answer. I'll try and keep it short. There are two answers to the question. One of which is kind of spiritual, one of which is about our relationship with God. I became a reverend because I felt called by God, and we're going to be talking about this a little bit later on. But I became a reverend because I felt that was what God was asking me to do. In the Bible, we're told that people are called by God to do lots of different things. To become a teacher is a calling. Is what it says in the New Testament, that God calls people to teach. And some people are called to be reverends, to be vicars or priests or whatever, from ministers, whatever phrase you want to use. So that's one answer. The second answer to it is the more practical side of it, which means that you've got to do lots of studying. You've got to go away to university, into colleges. You have to do what's called a curacy. So when someone is first made a deacon, is actually what they're made first of all, they have to serve in a church, and basically like a newly qualified NQT at school, they have a bit of oversight as they learn the job before they're set loose on the world to do the job.
And do you just have one church, or do you have a few churches?
Here where I am, I just have the one church. It's a very large geographical area that I cover, not a huge number of people. In my previous job in East Manchester, I had geographically a very small area. It was about a mile long and 3/4 of a mile wide, and something like 7,000 or 8,000 people in it. Where I am now is vastly bigger, but only about 2,500, 3,000 people in it. But at the moment here, I just have the one parish. There are clergy who have numerous churches to look after, 2 or 3. In some places, in very rural places, they can have 9, 10 or 11 churches to look after, which is a very difficult job.
And a very busy Sunday, yes.
And a very busy Sunday. But thankfully, not just clergy, not just vicars are called, all Christian people are called, and there's lots of people who are happy to assist in leading worship, not just those with these funny collars.
Oh yes, I did notice that actually. We might talk about that in a minute. Now, Dexter is very inquiring, and Dexter would like to know, why did the mean king kill Jesus on the cross?
Again, these are all very good questions. The reason for it is because the King Herod, Herod Antipas, as his full name, was scared. I don't know if you've ever come across bullies. I know we don't have bullies at Crossacres. I hope
Well,
we don't.
not really,
But there are people who can act in a bullying way. And most bullies, for all that they seem big and aggressive and all the rest of it, are actually often quite scared. It's what makes them act in that way, is because you kind of think if they get in first, then that keeps them safe. And Herod was a bully. He enjoyed his position as king, which was given to him by the Romans. It wasn't really his position to have, and because it was given to him by the Romans, he didn't have a very strong hold on it. It was something that was being given to him, and therefore was something that could be taken away from him as well. So he was a scared man, and Jesus came along, and people were proclaiming Jesus as a king, a different kind of king, but a king nonetheless, and a king whose authority and power came not from the Romans, not from his birth, from who his dad was, but is a king because of God. They're God's king, and he felt very threatened by that, and so they sought to do away with him and get him out of the way. The fact he was crucified, the fact he was killed on a cross, was just because that was a very humiliating way of killing someone. If you've got someone who is you're scared of, someone who is getting lots of support, then not to do away with them, but to do it in a way that's humiliating, that embarrasses that person as well as kills them, it would be a good way of doing it. And it's interesting that in the church, the cross, and I think there's a question about this later on. Oh, you've just brought that one up. The cross was actually very embarrassing to people. The cross wasn't used in Christian art for 500 years. There was lots of different images they used, but they didn't use the cross because it always had that stigma, that sense of embarrassment and shame.
Right. So if we go to Hannah's question then, so Hannah has the question, why are crosses in church? And Hannah's from 1SB, so that's Miss Brophy's class, and she wants to know about crosses in church, which ties in with what we're talking about.
It does. So I say for the first 500 years or so, the church never used the cross. The most common pictures that they used was of Jesus as the good shepherd, so either of a lamb or of Jesus as a person carrying a sheep. The kind of secret message, the secret symbol, was actually of a fish. You still see them now. On the backs of cars and things, people have these symbolic fish. That was actually the first Christian symbol, because Jesus told his disciples that he would make them fishers of men, that they were going to go out and catch people for God. And so the fish was actually an early image. But over time, the cross became more dominant, and people began to realize the importance of Jesus's death, of what it meant. And so the symbol of the way that he died became more prominent in art and became more common in churches. It is very odd. It's like a religion that might have a gun or a noose or an electric chair as its symbol. It's very, very bizarre in one sense, but it's also very powerful, that shows us how far God and how far Jesus were willing to go for his people, to act out of love, even to the point of being killed in this horrible way.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And so Tasneem in 1GS wants to know, why do people pray?
That's also a very good question. One of the things that the Bible teaches us is that God isn't somebody, in fact, it's what Jesus teaches us by coming to earth, that God isn't somebody who is far away and distant and remote. It's not somebody that we have to yell at or pick up a telephone. It's the only way we can make contact with us. We're told that God is with us. One of the names given to Jesus was Emmanuel, God with us. And if God is with us, then we are in a relationship with him. Imagine what it was like at home if those who live together in your home, those who are in your family, never spoke to one another.
Mm.
It would be horrible.
Yeah.
You know, the atmosphere would be awful. And that's what prayer is. Prayer is conversation. Prayer is simply speaking to God. And what makes it slightly complicated is that we often learn prayers. We learn the Lord's Prayer, for example, which is a very formal way of speaking to God. But it's formal because it's kind of designed to be used by lots of people in a formal setting. But if you imagine like the Queen and Prince Charles, you know, in public, Prince Charles refers to the Queen as Her Majesty, and he speaks in a very reverent, very official way in public. But in private, he doesn't come down in the morning and say, "Good morning, Your Majesty, how art thou today?" He comes in and says, "Hello, Mum, are you all right?" And that's the same with God. We speak to God in different ways. In public, we use one kind of prayer, but in private, in our personal prayers, we have a conversation with God. We speak to God as if he was sat next to us. We speak to God as our friend.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Now then, oh, just got 2 questions left. So Harry, oh no, we haven't. We've got 3 questions. So let's see Harry. Now Harry sent quite a few questions in. So I'm actually going to choose one of them because he had many questions and I think you've answered lots of those questions. He wants to know who built the church. Now, I wasn't sure if Harry meant the actual bricks of a church or he meant the church as in the concept of the church. So we'll go with, I don't know, should we go with sort of the concept? Where did the church come from?
Well, you raised an interesting point, and it's similar to the question that Serene answers as well. We need to understand what the church is, because when we think of the church, we tend to imagine something like what's behind me here. We tend to think of a building, but the church isn't a building. The church are actually the people who meet in the building, in the same way that many of you are at home doing your home learning. But you're still part of Crossacres School. You are still in school when you're having those lessons. Doesn't matter physically where you are in school. I don't think you do. No, you don't. At our local school here, when they're doing home learning, they actually put school uniforms on, even though they're sat at home.
Oh gosh, don't say that.
Oh yeah, so they still got that sense of being in school, even though they're in their own homes, scattered all over the place. So first of all, if we think about the church as the people, not about the building, that suggests what the answer might be. So who built the church? The church was built or founded on Jesus. Jesus came along. Jesus is the one who called people together. He called the disciples, his 12 friends, the 12 apostles. He called them to come and join him and be with him in his journey, in his mission. And those disciples then went out and they also called people together. And it's those people, it's people speaking to one another, people calling one another into this relationship with God that I spoke about with prayer. It's people calling those people into that relationship that built the church. And it started very small initially in Jerusalem and around Israel, but then it spread out throughout the world so that Christianity is now found in every corner of the world, built upon people who have gone out and invited and drawn people into this relationship with God. It's a bit like in the playground, you're playing a game and you see someone who's sat there, perhaps haven't got someone to play with, and you go to them and sort of say, well, you come and join in, play with us. And so the game gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you draw more people in. Who built that game? Well, someone initially said, shall we play? But it's those who went out and brought others in. They're the ones who built it. So that's who built the church. People built the church, founded on Christ. Why is church sacred? We've talked about holiness before, what holiness means, about being set aside. The Bible tells us that everybody who is called into this relationship with God is called to be saints. And saints is the same word, although it sounds nothing like it. Saints is the same word that means holy. They just come from different places, but the words are the same. So why is church sacred? Church building isn't particularly sacred. They are special places. Any place where people get together and enjoy themselves and have special relationships that are special, but they're not sacred in that sense, really, other than the fact that they are set aside for the worship and praise of God. Uh, it's the fellowship of saints. It is the church in terms of the people who've been called together into that relationship with God. They're the ones who are special. They're the ones who are sacred. A very brief story is about a man lived 1800 years ago, many years ago, called Lawrence. And he was ordered by the governor of where he lived to pay lots of money that he didn't have. He didn't have this money that we were asking for. And the man said to him, I want you to bring to me tomorrow the riches of the church here in this courtyard. And the next day, Lawrence turned up and the churchyard was full of people. Those were the riches of the church, the riches that he had to offer, not money and gold and buildings, but people called by God to worship and give him praise and to live his life.
So that's brilliant. That ties those two questions together really well, doesn't it? So we've got one last question. And it's a really important one, this, because Mark wants to know, what do children do in church?
This, strangely enough, this reflects on a previous answer. You need to understand what church is. Yeah. Children have a full place within God's church, within the people of God. It makes no difference how old you are. In the New Testament, a man called Paul wrote, in Christ there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, young nor old. It makes no difference. So in that sense of the church of the people of God, children have their full and complete place, no different from anybody else, just as important. Within the church, the sort of physical thing, there's lots of things that children do. Obviously, there are Sunday schools and different kinds of groups, but children help out in lots and lots of different ways. They help out in worship. They read the scriptures. They lead people in prayer. They assist in practical things like welcoming people into church and getting them sat down. Children sing in choirs. They help when we celebrate communion, as servers, the word that we use. So children have a full and complete role in the life of the church. They can't necessarily do everything that adults can do, but that's true in most areas of life. That there's always some restrictions. There's an age limit, when you can be made a vicar, for example. You can't be made a vicar at 12, although historically in the life of the church, there have been people who were made vicars at the age of 12. So it has happened. But the important thing really is that first point, that they are members of the body of Christ as much as everybody else. There was a very annoying song that was written a few years ago, which was meant to be a children's song, and it said, youth of today, church of tomorrow. And I refuse to sing it because the youth of today, the children of today, are the church of today.
Yes, absolutely.
You don't become the church at some point later on when you grow up. Children are part of the church, are the church.
Yes,
today.
I imagine that the children, because they grow into the rest of your church community, and then there will be more children.
Absolutely.
There we go. Well,
I'm a vicar. I was a child once, and as a child, I took a full, complete place in the life of the church, and only came to ordination later on.
Yeah. Thank you, Reverend Blay, so very, very much.
You are welcome.
For your time and all of your wisdom and all of your knowledge. That was brilliant. The children are going to love this. They've got some special work to do based on all of your answers as well. So thank you from everybody at Crossacres in Year 1 for your time for this question and answer session.
You're very welcome. It's been my pleasure. If I can help out again, if you get any more questions, I'm always willing to answer them for you if I can.
That is very kind. Thank you very much.